The twin suns were sinking behind the jagged mountains of the alien world, painting the dusty market in red and gold. Stalls made of old metal sheets and faded cloth crowded the streets, their sellers shouting in dozens of strange voices. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, oil, and something sour in the middle of the market. A wooden platform stood, its surface stained by years of use. On that platform, under the watching eyes of many species, stood Rala. She was thin. Too thin, her gray skin clung to her bones, and her long dark hair was tied back in a rough knot. Her large black eyes stared at the ground, refusing to meet the faces of those who had come to buy. Chains of dull iron bound her wrists, their weight pulling her shoulders down. Around her, the crowd murmured, voices blending into a constant, restless hum. The auctioneer, a tall insectoid creature with gold plates along its back, raised one claw and shouted, "Healthy female, strong worker, good for labor or other needs." The words made Ryle's stomach twist. She had heard them before, but each time they felt like knives. Some in the crowd leaned forward, studying her like one might study a tool. Others looked away, pretending not to care, though their eyes always came back, far away, beyond the edge of the market. Small figure hid behind a food stall. A boy, her boy, barely 6 cycles old. His ribs showed through his thin tunic, his eyes too big for his face. He clutched his stomach as the smell of cooking meat drifted by. Rala forced herself not to look at him. If she looked, she would break. And she could not break now. The bidding began. 5 credits. Shouted a heavy-set reptilian, his voice rough. 8. Called another, a creature with skin like cracked stone. Rala closed her eyes. Each number was another step away from her child. Another chain between them. But she had made her choice. She had sold herself so her boy could eat. She had told herself it was the only way. Still, the ache in her chest felt like it might tear her apart. The auctioneer's voice rang out again. 10 credits. Do I hear 12? The crowd shifted, some losing interest, others calculating their bids. And then a new voice cut through the noise. Calm, deep, and strangely warm. 20 heads turned. Standing at the edge of the crowd was a human. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that brushed against his boots. His hair was brown, his face lined with the marks of someone who had seen too much. He held a small metal case in one hand. His eyes, sharp, steady, were fixed on Rala. The market went silent for a moment. Humans were rare here, rarer still in this lawless mining colony. And their reputation was complicated. Some said humans were dangerous, always ready for a fight. Others said they were clever traders who could twist any deal in their favor. But no one here had seen one in years. The auctioneer hesitated, its gold plates shifting uneasily. 20 credits from the human, it announced, its voice careful. Any other bids? Silence. No one wanted to compete with a human, not openly. Sold. The auctioneer clicked. The chain between Ryla's wrists rattled as the insectoid unlocked it and handed the key to the stranger. Rala stood still, unsure what to expect. The human stepped forward, close enough for her to see the faint scar across his jaw. "My name's Elias Grant," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're coming with me." Ryla's throat tightened. She nodded without speaking. Her legs felt weak as she stepped down from the platform. The crowd melted away, pretending they had not been watching. Elias led her through the narrow market streets, past stalls of rusted tools, strange fruits, and cages full of small alien animals. The boy behind the food stall was gone now, and Rala felt both relief and pain when they reached the edge of the market. Elias stopped beside a small, weather-worn cargo ship. Its hull was scratched, its paint faded, but it looked ready to fly. Rala expected him to give her orders to tell her to clean or cook or work the engines. Instead, he opened the ship's ramp and motioned her inside. In the warm light of the cargo bay, he handed her a packet of food. "Eat," he said simply. She hesitated. "I must work first," she murmured. Elias shook his head. "Not until you've eaten." Her hands trembled as she took the food. It was simple bread, a strip of dried meat, a small fruit, but the smell made her dizzy. She ate quickly, unable to stop herself. When she looked up, Elias was watching her, not with greed or ownership, but with something else, something she could not name. "You're free now," he said quietly. Rala stared at him, unsure if she had heard right. "No chains," he continued. "No one owns you." Her voice was barely a whisper. Then, "Why did you buy me?" Elias's eyes didn't leave hers. "Because you needed help." The words seemed too simple to be true, but there was no time to question them. Not yet, because somewhere out there, her child was still alone. Still hungry, and Elias Grant. A tease changed everything. The hum of the cargo ship's engines filled the air. Rala sat in a corner of the small galley, the empty food packet resting on the table before her. Her hands were still trembling, though she tried to hide it. It had been months since she had eaten without fear of someone taking it away. Elias moved around the space with calm precision, checking switches, glancing at glowing screens. He didn't chain her, didn't lock her in a room, didn't even ask her to work. It made her uneasy. Nothing in her life had ever been this. Unguarded, people did not give without wanting something in return. Especially not humans. Or so she had always been told. She studied him when he wasn't looking. The lines on his face told of long journeys, of storms weathered in space. His coat was worn but well kept, his boots scuffed from years of travel. At his side hung a small metal tool, or maybe a weapon, its surface polished from use. Finally, he spoke, his voice breaking the low hum of the ship. "You didn't tell me your name," she hesitated, as if giving it away would cost her something. "Rala," she said softly. He nodded once, as if committing it to memory. "Rala," he repeated. Almost testing the sound, they sat in silence for a few moments. The ship's lights shifted to a dim blue as it lifted off. The market and its chaos shrinking below. Through the small viewing window, the world fell away, replaced by the endless black of space, scattered with stars. Rala had always hated this view. Space was too big, too empty. But now, for the first time, it felt like escape. "Why did you do it?" Elias asked suddenly. She froze. "Do what?" "Stand on that platform," he said. "Sell yourself." Her throat tightened, her gaze falling to the floor. "I had no choice," she murmured. "My child." He was starving. There was no food, no work. "I thought if I sold myself, someone might feed him." Her voice cracked on the last word. Elias didn't speak for a moment, but his jaw clenched. "Where is he now?" he asked. Her eyes flicked up, suspicion flashing. "You. Why do you want to know?" "Because," he said, leaning forward, "we're going to find him." The words hit her like a shock, sharp, almost painful. "No," she shook her head quickly. "You can't. It's dangerous. The place where he is. They won't let him go." Elias's eyes narrowed. "I've dealt with people like that before," he said. Something in his tone made her believe him, though she didn't want to. She had been disappointed too many times. Still, the idea planted itself in her mind like a fragile seed. They traveled in silence for a while. The ship's engines were steady, the stars outside slipping past in slow streams. Elias worked at the controls, tapping in coordinates she didn't recognize. Rala watched from the corner, her mind restless. This human was not like the stories, not cruel, not cold, but that made him harder to understand. Finally, she asked, "What do you want from me?" Elias didn't look at her when he answered. "I want you to tell me your story. All of it." She frowned. "Why?" "Because I can't help you if I don't know the truth," he said simply. No one had ever asked for her story before, only for her work, her obedience, or her silence. She told him about her homeworld, how it had been green once, full of rivers and tall crystal trees, how the war between the Korra and the Velith had burned it to ash. Her people scattered, hunted, enslaved. She spoke of her mate, lost during a raid. Of months spent moving from station to station, trading scraps, always one step ahead of debt collectors and slavers. Her voice trembled only when she spoke of her boy Lero, his laugh, his small hands holding hers, the day she told him to hide and never come out. When she finished, Elias leaned back, arms crossed. "You've been running a long time," he said quietly. She nodded, staring at the floor. He stood and went to a small storage cabinet, pulling out a folded blanket. "Get some rest," he said, setting it on the table beside her. "You'll need it." Rala hesitated. "Why?" "Because tomorrow," he said, "we start looking for Lero." Her breath caught. Part of her wanted to tell him it was impossible that they would be hunted, that people would kill for far less, but another part, a part she thought had died, wanted to believe him. That night, she lay on the narrow cot he'd given her. The steady thrum of the engines felt almost like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes, but sleep came slowly. Through the quiet, she heard Elias moving in the cockpit, plotting a course, checking his weapons, preparing for something dangerous. For the first time in years, Rala felt the smallest flicker of hope, and she was afraid of it because hope could be taken away. And the higher it lifted you, the further you had to fall. The next morning came slowly, if time could even be measured in the endless black of space. Rala woke to the faint smell of coffee, a human drink she had never tasted, and the low, steady hum of the ship. Elias was in the cockpit, a mug in his hand, eyes locked on the glowing star maps before him. He didn't look up when she stepped in, but his voice carried easily. "You slept longer than I expected." She sat in the seat beside him, not sure if she had been invited or not. The maps showed clusters of stars, colored lines marking routes between them. One in particular was blinking red. "What's that?" she asked, pointing where your boy might be. Elias said simply. Her chest tightened. "That's a black market moon," she whispered. "You can't just walk in there." Elias took a sip from his mug. "Good thing I don't plan to walk," he said. His tone was so calm, as if talking about a simple delivery run. But she knew better that Moon was controlled by Vorik's network, and Vorik didn't forgive debts. Rala leaned back, staring at the blinking light on the map. Memories began to surface, unwanted, but too strong to push away 5 cycles ago. Her world had been burning. The sky was split with streaks of fire. Enemy ships raining destruction on the crystal forests. Rala ran with Lero in her arms, his small face pressed into her shoulder to block out the smoke. Her mate, Karen, had stayed behind to hold off the raiders. She had never seen him again. They hid in caves during the first weeks, living off roots and the last of their water supply. When even that ran out, they moved to the spaceports, thinking safety might be found there. It wasn't. Instead, the ports were filled with predators, traitors, slavers, and mercenaries, all smelling desperation. She remembered the first time she saw Vorik. His smile had been too wide, his voice too smooth. He offered work, payment in food, maybe shelter. But it was a lie, the kind of lie that traps you before you see it. She and Lero had managed to slip away before, but Vorik's reach was long, and when Lero began to grow weaker, when his eyes lost their spark, she had made the choice, the one that haunted her every night. She had walked to Vorik's market and sold herself. Her last words to Lero had been, "I'll come back for you." But even as she said it, she hadn't believed it. "You went back there once, didn't you?" Elias's voice broke into her thoughts. She turned to him, startled. "What makes you say that?" "You have the look," he said, glancing at her. People who never try don't carry it. But you do. You tried and failed. And you've been carrying that weight ever since. Her throat felt dry. I went back after I escaped from my first owner, she admitted. I thought I could take him in the night. Just grab him and run. Her hands curled into fists at the memory. But Vorik knew. Waiting next time, he wouldn't. Just take the boy back. He'd hurt him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. So I left. I left him there. Elias didn't look away from the map. That wasn't leaving, he said quietly. That was surviving, so you could try again. Rala shook her head. You don't understand. Vorik isn't just some trader. He's got ships, guards, deals with half the smugglers in this sector. If you go after him, I've gone after worse, Elias cut in, his tone final. She studied him. Searching for the lie, but he was telling the truth, or at least, he believed he was. The strange thing was, she wanted to believe him. 2. Later, Elias brought her to the ship's small training bay. It was little more than an open space with a few storage crates and some old padded mats. What is this? She asked. If you're going to help me get your son, you need to be ready, Elias said, tossing her a wooden practice stick. She caught it awkwardly. I'm not a fighter. She said, neither was I, once, he replied, but I learned. They practiced for hours. Her arms ached, her legs trembled. But Elias's instructions were patient, never cruel. He corrected her stance. Showed her how to use an opponent's weight against them. At first, she thought it pointless. Vorik's guards were armed, well-trained, but something inside her began to shift. For the first time since the war, she felt like she could do more than run. That night, they sat in the galley again. The ship drifting in silent space, Elias worked on. A small device, its inner circuits glowing faintly. What is that? She asked. A gift for Vorik, Elias said, a faint smile on his lips. Rala didn't know if it was a weapon, a tracker, or something else entirely. But in that moment, she realized something. Elias wasn't just helping her out of kindness. He had a plan, and he'd been thinking 3 steps ahead from the moment he bought her. She went to her bunk, lying awake long after the lights dimmed. Her mind kept returning to Lero's face, the sound of his laugh for years. She had buried those memories to keep from breaking. Now Elias had dug them back up, and they burned inside her like fire. Somewhere out there, her son was waiting. And for the first time, she dared to believe she might actually keep her promise. The ship slipped out of hyperspace with a soft shudder. Before them, the stars stretched in a frozen sea of light. Elias's hands moved quickly over the controls. Eyes fixed on the red marker, blinking on the screen. That's our first stop, he said, a refueling station on the edge of Vorik's territory. Rala stood beside him, arms crossed tightly. Her gaze flicked from the map to the endless dark outside the viewing glass. Vorik's people will have eyes there. She warned they always do, Elias replied. We'll blend in. He made it sound easy. But Rala knew nothing about Vorik's reach was easy. Even the quiet stations, especially the quiet ones, could be traps. The refueling station floated like a dead moon, its metal surface scarred from years of neglect. Neon signs flickered weakly, casting pale light across the docking rings. Small ships drifted in and out, their shadows cutting across the docking bays. From a distance, it looked harmless, but Rala could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching. They docked without trouble. Inside, the station smelled of fuel, burnt metal, and cheap food. Merchants called from small stalls, hawking strange trinkets and stale bread. A few faces turned toward them, a human and an alien woman traveling. Together drew attention, but no one spoke. Elias moved with purpose. He stopped at a small maintenance shop, trading a piece of human tech for extra fuel cells. Rala kept close, scanning every shadow. She spotted a tall figure in a dark coat leaning against a wall. When she looked again, the figure was gone, back on the ship. They undocked and drifted away from the station, but the feeling of being watched did not fade. It grew, Elias noticed. It too, his jaw tightened as he checked the scanners. "Someone's following," he muttered. The screen lit up with a faint signal behind them. Not close enough to attack, but never falling far behind. Pirates. Rala asked, or Vorik scouts. Elias said. Either way, it meant danger. Hours passed in tense silence. The shadow ship kept its distance. Rala sat in the co-pilot's seat, fingers gripping the armrests. "Why don't you just lose?" "Them?" she asked. "Because if we run now, they'll chase harder," Elias said calmly. "Better to let them think we don't notice." She stared at him. "Is this all some kind of game to you?" He glanced at her, eyes hard. "No, it's a hunt. And in a hunt, you have to know whether you're the predator or the prey." Not long after, the ship's warning lights flared red. "Debris field ahead," Elias said, pulling the controls through the glass. Chunks of shattered rock and twisted metal drifted like a broken graveyard. The debris wasn't natural. The scars of laser fire marked the metal plates. "This was a convoy," Rala whispered. They were attacked. They weaved between. The floating wreckage, pieces of old cargo pods and broken hulls scraped against their shields. Then, without warning, a large chunk of metal spun toward them. "Hold on," Elias shouted, jerking the controls. The ship rolled sharply, just missing the debris. Rayla's breath caught. She wasn't used to being this close to death and still having someone fight for her survival. When they finally cleared the debris, Elias slowed the ship. Rala noticed his hands steady. Even after the close call, she realized something then. He wasn't just skilled. He was used to danger, maybe even more than he let on. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Elias didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Because someone did the same for me once." His tone was final. But the look in his eyes told her there was more to the story, a past he wasn't ready to share. The shadow ship was still there when the sensors pinged again. But this time, there was another signal, stronger. Closer, Elias's eyes narrowed. "That's not a scout," he said. "That's a hunter." Before Rala could ask, a voice crackled. Over the comms, low, smooth, and dripping with menace. "Captain Grant, I hear you've been shopping in my market." Rala froze. She knew that voice. Vorik. Elias didn't flinch. "Vorik, I was just passing through." "Oh, I think you were doing more than that," Vorik replied. "You bought something of mine." "I want it back." Ryla's hands went cold. Elias leaned forward, his voice calm. "She's not yours anymore." There was a pause. Then Vorik's laugh, cold and amused. "You think this is about her?" "No, Captain. This is about the boy." The comms went silent. Rala turned to Elias, panic rising in her chest. "How does he know?" she whispered. Elias's expression was unreadable. "Because he's been watching longer than we thought." The hunter ship moved closer, its shadow growing on the scanner. Elias's hands tightened on the controls. "Strap in," he said. "Things are about to get rough." The hunter ship loomed closer, its dark hull bristling with weapons. Rala sat frozen, eyes fixed on the growing shadow on the scanner. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Elias didn't look away from the controls. "We're not fighting him head-on," he said, voice steady. "Not yet." The comm crackled again. Vorik's smooth voice filled the cockpit. "Captain Grant, you should have left her where she belonged. Now, you've walked into my reach." Elias flicked a switch, cutting the audio. "We're changing course," he said. "To where?" Rala asked. "To his moon," Elias replied. She stared at him, disbelief twisting into anger. "That's suicide." "Not if we get there before he does," Elias said, pushing the throttle. The stars blurred as the ship surged forward. Elias navigated between asteroid clusters and radiation fields. cutting a path Vorik's heavier hunter ship couldn't take. The risk was enormous. One wrong turn and they'd be shredded. But Elias moved like a man who'd done this dance before. After hours of tense flying, the moon appeared. It was small, covered in jagged rock and dim industrial lights. From orbit, Rala could see the black market structures, a tangled web of landing pads, towers, and neon signs glowing like hungry eyes. This was Vorik's den, the place she had once walked into willingly. The place she had left her son. They landed on a forgotten pad at the far edge of the settlement. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp scent of chemicals. Shadows moved along the rooftops, and the faint thump of music echoed from deeper. Inside, Elias pulled two small devices from his coat. One, a compact pistol, and the other, a metal disc no bigger than his palm. He handed the pistol to Rala. "You remember what I taught you?" She nodded, gripping it tight. "And this?" she asked, pointing at the disc. "A friend," Elias said with a faint smile, tucking it into his belt. They moved through the narrow alleys, keeping to the darkest paths. Rayla's senses were sharp. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every voice in the distance like a warning. Elias walked ahead with quiet confidence, scanning corners before stepping out. When they reached the main district, she saw them. Vorik's guards, tall and armored, their insect-like helmets reflecting the neon lights. One of the guards turned, scanning the street. Elias pulled Rala into a side corridor just in time. The guard passed, none the wiser. "How do you know?" "These streets," she whispered. "I've been here before," he said simply, not explaining further. Finally, they reached a building she knew too well, Vorik's main trading hall. The metal doors were sealed, guarded by two figures armed with shock rifles. Inside those walls, she knew, was the child she had been dreaming of every night for years. Elias studied the entrance, then stepped back. "We can't go through the front," he said, "too obvious." He led her around the side, where a drainage pipe ran from the building into the lower district. The stench was sharp, but it was narrow enough to go unnoticed. They slipped inside, moving through the dark metal tunnel until they reached a small grate. Through it, Rala could see a storage room lit by a single yellow bulb. Crates were stacked high, and in the corner a small figure sat curled against the wall, arms wrapped around his knees. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Lero," she whispered, but before she could move, a heavy shadow stepped into view. One of Vorik's guards. He stopped beside the boy. Dropping a tray of food onto the floor, the boy didn't look up. The guard kicked the tray closer before turning, and leaving Elias's hand was on her arm, steadying her. "We wait until the guard is gone for good," he murmured. But Rala could barely hear him. Every part of her wanted to break the grate and run to her son. When the room was empty, Elias slid a small tool from his coat and began cutting the grate quietly. The sound was barely more than a whisper, but then a sharp click echoed behind them. Rala turned slowly in the tunnel's shadows. Two of Vorik's guards stood, blocking their escape, weapons aimed. One of them tilted his head, speaking in a low voice into his comm. "They're here." Elias didn't move. His hand hovered near the disc on his belt. The guard stepped forward. "You shouldn't have come, human," he hissed. "That's the thing about me," Elias said, his voice almost casual. "I'm bad at staying away." And then, in a blur, Elias tossed the disc to the floor. It emitted a blinding flash of light, the tunnel filling with white fire. Rala felt Elias grab her arm, pulling her through the now open grate into the storage room. Lero's head snapped up, eyes wide with shock and hope. But before she could reach him, the outer door to the room burst open, and Vorik himself stepped inside. Vorik filled the doorway like a shadow made solid. His tall, lean frame moved with the confidence of a predator. His skin shimmered faintly under the yellow light, and his eyes pale and sharp. Locked on Rala, You came back, he said softly, almost like a welcome. Ryla's breath caught. Every instinct screamed to run, but her legs refused to move. Elias stepped in front of her, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol. "Step aside," he said, voice steady. Vorek's mouth curved into a slow smile. "You must be the human who thinks he can steal from me," he said. "Do you know? How many have tried?" "I'm not them," Elias replied. Vorek's gaze flicked to Liro, who had risen to his feet. The boy's eyes darted between the three of them. "Liro," Rala whispered. The boy's lips trembled, his voice small. "Mother." The sound nearly broke her. She took a step forward, but Vorek raised one hand. "Not so fast," he said. "You want him?" "There's a price." Elias's jaw tightened. "Name it. Your ship. Your weapons." "And her," Vorek said. His smile widening. "The boy goes free. She stays." The room felt colder. Ryla's heart pounded. Elias didn't answer. Instead, his hand moved in a blur. The pistol fired, the shot striking the light above Vorek's head. Glass rained. Down, the room plunging into shadow. "Move!" Elias barked, grabbing Ryla's arm. She rushed to Liro, scooping him into her arms. His small body warm against hers. The sound of boots thundered in the hall as Vorek's guards surged toward the room. They slipped through the side door, Elias leading them into a narrow service corridor, the walls dripped with condensation. Pipes hissing with bursts of steam behind them. Vorek's voice carried through the metal passages. "You can run, human. But every step you take, I'll be right behind you." The corridor split into two paths. Elias chose the left, pushing through a maintenance hatch that opened into the lower market. Crowds moved between food stalls and weapon vendors. Unaware of the hunt happening in their midst, "Stay close," Elias murmured. Keeping one hand on Rayla's shoulder, she clutched Liro tightly, feeling his small heartbeat pounding against hers. For the first time in years, she had him back. And for the first time, she feared losing him even more than before. A guard spotted them, shouting into his come. Elias shoved them into an alley between two stalls. A stack of metal crates blocked their way. Without a word, he climbed up. Then reached down to pull Rala and Liro after him. From the top, they moved across the roofs. The neon glow painting their faces in red and blue. Below, Vorek's men spread through the market. Scanning the crowd from this height, Rala could see the black sleek shape of Vorek's hunter's ship docked at the far end of the settlement. If they could reach it before wreck, maybe they could disable it. They dropped down behind an old cargo warehouse. Elias knelt, pulling the small metal disc, the friend he'd shown Rala earlier, from his belt. "What is it really?" she asked. "A pulse mine," he said. "Shuts down anything with a power core for about 5 minutes. "That's not long. It'll be enough," Elias replied. They crept toward the docking bay, sticking to the shadows. Rayla's heart pounded as they neared Vorek's ship. 2 guards stood watch, their armor glowing faintly under the bay lights. Elias raised a hand, signaling for her to wait. He slipped forward silently, vanishing into the shadows seconds later. Both guards dropped, stunned by the silent strike of his pistol. "Come on," he whispered, waving them forward. They moved quickly. Reaching the base of Vorek's ship, Elias set the pulse mine against the hull, its lights blinking in countdown. But before they could retreat, a voice echoed through the bay. "You think I don't know my own ship?" Vorek stepped from the shadows, flanked by half a dozen armed guards. The mine's blinking lights reflected in his eyes. Elias stepped in front of Rala and Liro. "You won't stop me," he said. "Oh, I won't have to," Vorek replied, lifting a small remote. "I just have to stop it," with a click. The mine's lights went dark. Elias swore under his breath. Vorek's men advanced, their weapons raised. Ryla's mind raced, and then she remembered the narrow vent above the docking bay's east wall. She'd seen it years ago while unloading. Cargo for Vorik. She turned to Elias, whispering fast. Up there, the vent it leads to the old fuel lines. Elias glanced, then nodded once. Go, he whispered, handing her the pistol. I'll hold them. No, Rala. Go. She ran, clutching Lero's hand, the sound of weapons fire echoing behind them. The vent was small, but they squeezed through, the metal biting into her hands. Below, she could hear Elias moving, his voice taunting Vorik, buying them seconds. They didn't have. They reached the end of the vent and dropped into a dim corridor that smelled of rust and fuel. Somewhere ahead, the faint hum of the ship's engines promised escape. But before she could take another step, a shadow detached itself from the wall. A guard stood blocking the path, weapon in hand, and in that instant, Rala realized Elias wasn't the only one buying time. Vorik had been hurting them all along. The guard smiled under his helmet. Going somewhere? The guard's weapon gleamed in the dim corridor light. Rala froze, pushing Lero behind her. Her fingers tightened on Elias's pistol. Though her hands shook. Give me the boy, the guard said, his voice metallic through the helmet, and you might walk away. She heard footsteps pounding closer. More guards coming. If they caught her here, it would be over. Ryla's breath came fast. No, she said, her voice low. She raised the pistol. The guard laughed, taking a slow step forward. You? Won't pull the trigger. Her mind flashed to the day she had left Lero behind. The hollow ache that had followed every step since. She would not live that again. Her finger tightened. The shot rang out. The guard crumpled, the weapon clattering to the floor. Lero stared up at her, wide-eyed. You saved me. He whispered. She grabbed his hand, pulling him forward. I promised I'd come back, she said, and I'm keeping it. They ran through the fuel line corridor, the hum of Vorik's docking bay growing louder. At the far end, a maintenance hatch opened into the shadows behind the ships. If they could just reach Elias, a sharp, electric boom split the air. Rala turned and her stomach dropped. Through the hatch, she saw the bay and Elias. Pinned to the ground by two guards, Vorik stood over him, the pulse mine in one hand, a blade in the other. Enough games. Vorik's voice was cold now. Stripped of its earlier amusement, you cost me time, you cost me men. And I think it's time you learn what I do to thieves. Ryla's mind raced. If she charged in, they'd all be taken. If she ran, Elias would die buying her time. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Elias looked at her through the chaos. Not fear, not panic, but steady focus. He mouthed a single word. Go. But she didn't move. Something in her, the same thing Elias had been trying to awaken, refused to leave him. If humans could fight for someone they barely knew, so could she. She crouched low, slipping back into the fuel lines. Her eyes caught a thick pipe, labeled, in alien script, volatile fuel. She pulled the valve loose. A sharp hiss filling the air as the scent of chemicals spread. She dug into her pocket, pulling out a small spark stick she had taken from the maintenance room earlier. Her hands trembled. She had one chance. She lit the stick, the small flame bright against the shadows. Then she shouted, her voice echoing across the bay. Vorik. His head snapped toward her. He saw the flame, smelled the fuel. His pale eyes narrowed. You wouldn't, he said. Try me, Rala shot back. The guards hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly. Elias used the moment to twist free, slamming one guard into the other. The pulse mine clattered from Vorik's hand. Elias kicked it toward Rala. She caught it, slapped it against Vorik's ship, and stepped back. Its lights began to blink fast, urgent. Vorik's gaze flicked between his ship and the flame. For the first time, Rala saw uncertainty in his eyes. This isn't over, he hissed. Retreating toward the bay doors, his remaining guards followed, dragging the wounded. Elias was beside her in seconds. You could have blown the whole bay. He said. She gave him a sharp look. And you would have been worth it. She replied. The mine detonated, not in fire, but in a deep, humming pulse. Every light in Voryx. Ship went out, its engines dying with a final shudder. Elias grinned faintly. 5 minutes, he said. Let's go. They ran for Elias's ship. Rala carrying Lero while Elias covered their escape. Alarms blared through the settlement. Red lights flashing across the walls. In the distance, Voryx's furious voice echoed over the comm system. Find them. Now. Elias's ship came into view, battered, scratched, but still waiting. They sprinted up the ramp, the hatch ceiling behind them. Elias slid into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. The engines roared to life. Lifting them from the bay, Rala held Lero close, feeling the vibration of the ship as it climbed higher. Through the viewing glass, she saw Voryx's dark figure standing in the docking bay below. Even from here, she could feel his promise of revenge. The black market moon fell away behind them, replaced by the quiet stretch of stars. Only then did Rala let herself breathe. Lero's small arms tightened around her neck. Are we safe now? He asked, his voice small. She glanced at Elias, who didn't look away from the stars ahead. For now, Elias said, but we'll have to keep moving. Rala nodded. It didn't matter, as long as Lero was with her. She could keep moving. Forever, hours later, with the ship drifting in the safety of unmarked space, they sat together in the galley. Elias set a steaming bowl of food in front of Lero. The boy's eyes lit up, and he ate quickly. Rala watched him, her chest aching with relief. Elias leaned back, sipping his coffee. You could have left me back there, he said quietly. So could you, she replied. A small smile touched his lips. Guess that makes us even. When Lero finished eating, he leaned sleepily against Rala. Elias stood, heading for the cockpit. She called after him. Why, Elias? Why do all this for us? He paused in the doorway. Because once someone gave me a second chance, he said. And I decided I'd spend the rest of my life giving them to others. He looked back, meeting her eyes, and because humans. Don't walk away, Rala. Held her son closer. Maybe her people had been wrong about humans. Maybe, just maybe, they were more dangerous than she'd thought. Not because of their weapons or ships, but because of how far they would go for someone they cared about outside. The window, the stars stretched endlessly, and for the first time in years, the future felt open.